Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Bellwether District community meeting. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Hi, everyone. If you just joined us, welcome to tonight's Bellwether District community meeting. We're waiting for a few more people to join, and we'll get started in just a minute. Hi, everyone. If you just joined us, welcome to tonight's Bellwether District community meeting. We will get started in just a few minutes. Thanks. Hey, in the interest of time, we're going to get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our third community meeting of 2023. My name is Mia Fioravanti, and I'm on the corporate affairs team here at the Bellwether District. We're excited to share some great updates with all of you on the project tonight. But as always, I want to start by just sharing a quick overview of how we'll conduct Q&A tonight. First, we'll be taking all questions following tonight's presentations. If you have a question, you can feel free to enter it into the Q&A function in the chat throughout the meeting. When we get to Q&A, if you would like to ask your question live, please raise your virtual hand, and my colleague Matt will give you the ability to show your screen and unmute your line. Please limit live questions to one per person so we can give everyone equal time. And we'll also be limiting each question and answer to 2 minutes so we can get through as many as possible. Again, we'll get through as many questions as possible until about 7:15 p.m. tonight. And as always, if we don't get to your question, we will post responses to both answered and any unanswered questions to our website following the meeting. So tonight, you will hear updates from our environmental remediation team. During our development update, you'll hear from our consultants at Dynamic, who will provide an overview of our traffic impact study. And then I will close the meeting with some updates on recent activity on our work in the community. So first, I just want to share a quick overview of HRP's commitments in the Bellwether District project and what that means in terms of benefits for our city and region. So over the course of the project, over $4 billion will be invested in the cleanup and redevelopment of the site. In the long term, we project $100 million in annual tax revenue for the city and $120 million in annual tax revenue for the state. As part of our commitment, we are making a number of community and workforce investments And those include scholarship funding and internship opportunities and pre-apprenticeship program support, among other things. And according to our latest economic impact study, we'll add 19,000 permanent jobs and an estimated 20,000 construction jobs over the next 10 to 15 years. We'll also make significant investments in reconnecting the site to the neighboring community, investing in LEED certified buildings and other green infrastructure, and of course, demolishing and cleaning up the former refinery site.
Thanks, Mia. I'm going to run through our phase 1 schedule here. We're going to start off with the demolition right at the top. So right around the middle of 2023 is when our demolition was substantially complete. And we do anticipate demolition to be totally complete right around the end of Q1 2024. On the remediation front, we do anticipate ongoing efforts throughout the entirety of the program. And we've shown that in this gray line, basically from the beginning all the way through the end of 2025 and for the foreseeable future after that. Getting into the industrial work, we did start earthwork in Q2 2023. We do have some slides following this to show some of the progress on that earthwork. We hope to get into the vertical construction starts before the end of this year, right in Q4 2023. And we're hoping to have our first building completed approximately a year after that. Moving up to the innovation campus to the north, just slightly following the industrial program, we're looking at starting that earthwork in the middle of Q1 2024, taking about a year for the substantial completion on that earthwork up there, which is going to allow us to have vertical starts kicking off in Q1 2025 on that portion of the campus. And certainly on the green bar here, we look to engage with all these quarterly public meetings and make sure that we're giving updates in a timely fashion. Next slide. So this brings us to some of the progress that we've made so far on the industrial phase 1 of earthwork. The photo that we're looking at here is the Lot 15 surcharge placement. So Lot 15 is just west of 26th Street. And this is going to allow us to put a building on this footprint and be structurally sound when we go and place the weight of that building on this pad. We did complete this work in the middle of Q3 2023, and now we are evaluating the settlements underneath this surcharge. Next slide. So in tandem with the surcharge that was placed, we also finished the earthwork component of Lot 11 and Lot 15 stormwater management components. In the distance, you can see the stormwater asset on Lot 11, and in the foreground, you can see the stormwater asset that's on Lot 15, and these were largely planned around our future roadway networks. Next slide. In addition to the first two slides, here you can see additional work going on Lot 16. The program on Lot 16 is very similar to 15. First, we need to bring all the areas to an equal grade, and then the southern portion of this lot would receive a surcharge, and then the northern portion is likely going to receive a deep dynamic compaction to make sure that that building is structurally sound when we go to build. Next slide.
Thanks, Kurt. I'll take it from here, and we can go to the next slide, and I can give an update on our environmental work. Let me turn my camera on. Here I am. So first, before I get into the details of what we have been up to, I need to start with just a reminder for everyone about the two responsible parties that are present on this site. So ourselves, Hilco Redevelopment Partners. You'll also hear us refer to ourselves as PESRM, the entity that we acquired in the summer of 2020. And then also there's another party, Evergreen Sunoco, that is responsible for historical contamination at the property. And that dividing line in time is September 2012. So we at HRP are responsible for cleanup of contamination that was released to the environment after September 2012. And Evergreen Sunoco is responsible for contamination that was released before September 2012. We work in very close coordination on the overall cleanup for the site. In addition to that sort of pre and post September 2012, HRP is also responsible for the management of the soil that we are moving around the property as part of the redevelopment. So I'll talk more about that on a following slide. We take very close observation and track that soil really closely during our work to make sure that no soil is relocated to a place that would not be okay for future use. We're also responsible for what we refer to as vapor intrusion assessment. So vapor intrusion is the potential for vapors associated with the historical contamination to move into the indoor air of buildings. That's not something that we want to occur. And because we are going to be building new buildings at the property, that's something that we'll be responsible for. And I'll talk more about that in subsequent meetings as we get closer to new buildings being present on the site. Next slide, please. So the first thing I'll update on is what our remediation work. So these again are post September 2012 or releases that occurred after September 2012. I'm showing here the approximate location of 5 areas where we know there are releases that occurred after September 2012. These are areas that HRP is taking through the Pennsylvania cleanup program, often referred to as the Act 2 program. So this figure shows the general location of those areas. They're kind of focused in the middle of the site. And if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about the types of remediation that we're doing in those areas. So this table lists the 5 locations that I was pointing out on the prior slide. The first 2, the ones that we refer to as the number 3 separator release area and the Udex release area are locations where there was liquid oil spilled to the subsurface that needed to be remediated. In each of those cases, we're talking about physically removing that oil from the ground. The number 3 separator release is largely complete, and most of that remediation work was actually done prior to our acquisition of the property, but we're still continuing to monitor it and make sure that that work is complete. The second row, the one we refer to as the Udex release area, is the largest remediation system that HRP is operating at the site, and it's an approximately 8-acre area where there's liquid oil in the ground. And I'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide. But that's an area where we've come in since we acquired the property. We've changed the remedial technology that we're using to use a more aggressive technology that more quickly removes that oil from the subsurface. The last 3 that are shown on this table are different in that they're not locations where there was liquid oil in the subsurface. The contamination is more focused in these areas on superficial soil contamination. There wasn't liquid oil sort of trapped in the subsurface. So for those 3, the primary remediation approach was excavation and offsite disposal of contaminated soil. You can go to the next slide. This chart shows the Udex release area, which I mentioned on the prior slide, which is the largest of our remediation areas. The specifics of the graph are not important if they're hard to read, but it's the slope of that line, the shape of that blue line, that shows how much oil we've removed from the ground over time. So you can see that line is continuing to go up, and it even gets sort of steeper a couple of years ago, and that's when we made that change in remediation technology that I mentioned. So we'll keep running that remediation system until we removed all of the oil that we're able to get out of the ground. And that's what that graph illustrates. Next slide, please. So in addition to sort of active cleanup of the oil in the ground and cleanup of contaminated soil that I mentioned, we're also responsible for managing the soil that you heard Kurt talking about that's getting moved around during earthwork. So We have environmental professionals who are on site while this earthwork is occurring, and they are watching the soil get moved around. And what they're watching is to make sure that soil doesn't get moved to a place where it would not be okay, sort of in the final use of the site. And the way they know that is that before we began this earthwork, we sampled all of the soil that was going to be moved prior to moving it. So we collected thousands of samples for laboratory analysis, so we know what is in all of this soil. And now we have environmental professionals out there using lots of figures and drawings, and they track where that soil is sort of finally located. And there are different uses of where the soil can be placed based on the results of the sampling that we did prior to the earthwork. So this is just a photograph. Kurt had better photographs earlier of what that earthwork looks like, and we have people watching that soil continuously so we can document where it goes. Next page, please. And then in addition to the watching of the soil, we are also monitoring air quality at the perimeter of the earthwork to make sure that during that earthwork, we don't see unacceptable concentrations in outdoor air. So what we're showing here on the right is a figure that's showing the location of 6 monitoring stations where we continuously monitor for 2 things. We monitor for dust and we monitor for volatile organic compounds. We monitor for both of those things continuously. And the reason we're looking for them is the volatile organic compounds could be present in vapors in outdoor air. And we want to make sure that we do not have unacceptable concentrations of those vapors in outdoor air. So we monitor for those. For dust, dust can be a nuisance on its own if it's present at high enough concentrations. That's one reason we monitor for dust. And 2, we monitor for dust because the dust could be produced by the soil, and there are chemical contaminants in the soil. So we monitor for dust to make sure that the chemical contaminants in the soil don't get into the air at an unacceptable level. So at those 6 locations, we continually monitor, constantly monitor for both dust and VOCs. And there's a plan on our website that explains how this monitoring is done and the equipment that is used. It also explains the action levels that we have in place for both the volatile organic compounds and the dust. And what's great about these monitors is that they can alert us in real time, so immediately, if we see concentrations that approach the action levels. So if we see concentrations start to creep up, we will get notified by these monitors on site, and then we can take action on site to increase dust suppression or increase vapor suppression, so that we don't see issues at the perimeter of the site. And those data that we collect are then reported on the website every month. So all of the data is submitted in a report onto the website that anyone is welcome to take a look at. And that's my last slide.
Thanks, Juliana. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Melissa Schrock, and I lead our mixed-use development team here at HRP. We're really happy to be back with you this evening. And as we've had several questions about traffic and traffic impacts and mitigation in our prior meetings, tonight we're going to be joined by Corey Chase from Dynamic, our transportation engineer, and he's going to be discussing the traffic impact study, or TIS, as it relates to our first phase of development, which is on the industrial side of the campus, as Kurt just showed you in some of the slides of the earthwork. Next slide. But before we jump into the TIS, as a reminder, and since there may be some folks on here tonight who are joining us for the first time, we wanted to take a quick moment to review the overall Bellwether District development plan and our goals for the project. As many of you know, HRP purchased a site back in 2020 and began the enormous undertaking of decommissioning and deconstructing the oil refinery. And as you heard from me a moment ago, that work is now mostly complete, and we're turning our attention to the future transformation of the site. So in its former use, the site was home to a single employer right? But in the future, the site will be home to dozens of employers in a wide range of industries, from logistics and distribution to light manufacturing and research and development. And this will provide a more diverse and resilient employment opportunities to Philadelphians across a broad spectrum of professions and contribute significantly to the economic development of the region. Next. So here's a plan of the innovation area that you can see that's north of Passyunk Avenue, and that is anticipated to house approximately 3 to 4 million square feet of life science, biomanufacturing, pharmaceutical, and other innovative uses that build upon Philadelphia's world-class academic institutions and position as the global leader in cell and gene therapy. Over time, it's estimated that this area could be home to 8,500 jobs in these growth industries. And the industrial and logistics area to the south of Passyunk could support over 10 million square feet of modern warehousing, distribution, and light manufacturing facilities, leveraging Philadelphia's prime location on the eastern seaboard and bringing over 10,000 new 21st century jobs to the city. George?
Thank you, Melissa, and good evening, everyone. My name is George Needs, and I'm with the mixed-use development team here at Hilco Redevelopment Partners. So I'm just going to talk to you, through some of the project goals that we're looking to address as we redevelop the site. So over the last couple of years, we've undertaken a large planning effort that has ultimately culminated in developing a framework for how we intend to redevelop the site. And we've spent some time sharing that with the community over the course of the past quarterly public meetings. And that framework was really built off 3 key project goals, which we felt, was important and is important to remind everyone, just so we don't lose sight of them. So that first goal, you can see, is reintegrating the site back into the city framework and back into the urban fabric. So, given the site's prior use under which it operated for over a century, as a result, the city has effectively grown around it. So our first goal, this goal is really tied to how we think about and how we intend to reintegrate the site. And by that, we mean creating new access points, enabling new connections to be made into the existing street network, bicycle and pedestrian and transit networks as well. The second goal of creating green pathways really looks at how we can create a public realm and a street network that is safe, multimodal, and uses landscaping to connect open spaces, provide an enjoyable pedestrian experience, and also help to manage stormwater in a sustainable way. And then lastly, our third project goal is tied to creating a sustainable district that really looks at how we intend to incorporate important sustainability goals and features that will help to contribute to delivering a sustainable and resilient district for decades to come. Next slide, please. So as we think about reintegrating the site, we're going to be delivering, these are sort of some key goals tied to that primary goal. So we're going to be delivering new internal streets that will provide access and key connections throughout the site, as well as sort of important off-site street improvements and intersection upgrades that will consider and address how these internal connections tie into the existing street and road networks. We're also going to be providing new pedestrian and bicycle connections that will encourage multimodal transit and also connect into existing city pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. And lastly, we're going to be looking at how we can bring transit service and access to the site through connections into the existing SEPTA transit network. Our second goal sort of looks at how we intend to create green pathways. We want to make sure that, again, we're encouraging safe multimodal access throughout the site. So we're going to be planting thousands of new trees and plantings across the site, which in turn is going to enhance the tree canopy and thereby helping to mitigate heat island effect. We're going to be adding additional stormwater retention capacity on site that will help protect it from flooding and where possible using green infrastructure to do that. And then lastly, we're going to be delivering protected bike lanes and sidewalks that will encourage safe multimodal access for pedestrians and cyclists. And then the third goal, just looking at some big picture characteristics of the site that will help to contribute toward delivering a sustainable and resilient district. I think simply by decommissioning and deconstructing its former use, we will have reduced emissions in Philadelphia by 16%. So that's, just simply by eliminating that use, we've really contributed to those goals of reducing fossil fuels and improving air quality. And as we move forward with the next phase of development for the site, we're going to be planning and designing buildings that are high performing and also LEED certified. So finding opportunities to install solar and EV infrastructure and ultimately substantially reducing the need and reliance on fossil fuels. And then lastly, we're going to be regrading and rebalancing the site to ensure that all roads and key infrastructure sit outside of or above the 100-year floodplain, and that all buildings are out of the 500-year floodplain. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Corey Chase, who's going to talk through some of our TIS study that we completed.
Thanks, George. Good evening, everyone. I'm Corey Chase with Dynamic Traffic. We've been involved with HRP on the preparation of the traffic impact study for several years now. And just to give everyone on the call an idea as to what exactly a traffic impact study, or TIS, as we commonly refer to them for short, is, in its most general form, it reviews and analyzes the existing and future traffic conditions and provides a comparative analysis between the two to see if there are any resulting impacts as a result of whatever development we're proposing. Traffic studies always require review from the local and state agencies. In this case, through the city of Philadelphia, we're dealing with the Streets Department, and we're also dealing with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, or PennDOT. So there's been extensive coordination between HRP, PennDOT, and the City Streets Department. That coordination actually starts before we even start the preparation of the traffic impact study. Both jurisdictional agencies require scoping meetings to be conducted prior to the preparation of the traffic impact study. And what that does is it allows us and the developer the opportunity to present conceptually to both jurisdictional agencies, what the intended scope of the project is, where it's going to be located, and in turn, those jurisdictional agencies can identify what intersections and what roads they're going to require us to analyze as part of that traffic impact study. As we go through the development of the traffic impact study, we review both the on-site and off-site intersections and roadway network. And as I mentioned, we compare those existing and proposed future traffic conditions to determine if any resulting traffic impacts occur and if any off-site or on-site mitigation needs to be proposed to mitigate any of those resulting traffic impacts. Where are we currently in the process? As Melissa mentioned, we're currently looking at the first phase of the industrial development, which is located along 26th Street, just to the west of its intersection with Hartranft Avenue. Just because of the overall scope and nature of the Bellwether District development, it was agreed with both the Streets Department and with PennDOT that it was best to take a phased approach to analyzing traffic impacts of this development. What that allows us to do is keep reevaluating the traffic conditions as these additional future phases come online. And it also allows us to get an actual reading of the traffic generation that would be generated by the development, as there'll be existing phases online as we're continuing to monitor and analyze future phases of development. So in the traffic engineering world, we utilize data which is published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. That's the national and state standard for developing traffic engineering trip generation projections. What that's going to allow us to do in the future is compare what those national projections are for this development with the actual traffic counts that are being generated by the facility. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're currently looking at phase one of the industrial development. You can see the area that's dashed in blue. It's located directly adjacent to 26th Street. It consists of 3 industrial buildings totaling approximately 2 million square feet in size. When we initially kick off the traffic impact study, we actually do manual turning movement counts at each of the intersections that are required by the Streets Department by PennDOT as part of our scope of study. What those turning movement counts do is they establish the peak hour traffic volumes at each of those intersections. As traffic engineers, we typically focus on the peak commuter hours. So you have your weekday morning peak hour and you have your weekday evening peak hour. Generally, it corresponds with the overall commuting patterns on the adjacent roadway network. We have an analytical software which allows us to enter those existing traffic volumes into it. And what it does is it provides an average vehicle delay for the operational conditions of those intersections. The average vehicle delay is calculated based on the traffic volumes and the turning movements at those intersections, as well as whether the intersection is controlled by a traffic signal or controlled by a stop sign. And again, we conduct those level of service analyses in both an existing condition, what we refer to as the no-build condition, which is the future build-out year for the proposed development without consideration of the additional traffic generated by the Phase 1 industrial development. We also consult with the City Planning Department and the City Streets Department at that time to determine if there are any existing developments in the area which have been recently approved but not yet constructed, which could also be a source of future traffic generation. Our goal, and always in working with the jurisdictional agencies, is to provide a comprehensive analysis of those future traffic conditions. So we reach out and consult with the city to determine if there's anything in the area that could potentially be an additional source of traffic generation that wouldn't have been captured through those traffic counts, and factor that into the future analysis for the intersection. So we really get an accurate assessment as to what the future baseline condition, operational conditions will be. And then we have the opportunity to reassess it with the additional traffic generated by the proposed development to determine if there are any degradations or anything that would require mitigation to improve the operational conditions. Based on our consultations with the Streets Department and with PennDOT, 16 intersections were identified as requiring study as part of the analysis for this industrial phase. In addition to those 16 offsite intersections, we're also looking at the internal intersections and driveway intersections within the subject property. As I mentioned, we're really focusing on the weekday morning and the weekday evening peak hour trip generation impacts. And what we also do is we provide a breakdown of those peak hour trip generation impacts for what would be made up of passenger vehicles or employees traveling to and from the site, as well as the trucks that would be generated to and from this proposed industrial development. And again, as I mentioned, we look at the capacity analysis scenarios in the no build and build condition to determine if there are any resulting impacts that would require mitigation, both along the site frontage as well as those 16 offsite intersections that I mentioned as well. Next slide, please. This is a list of the 16 intersections that were studied as part of the development. It stretches all the way from 34th Street to the north, 34th and Wharton Street to the north, to Penrose Avenue and South 26th Street to the south. So, there's a wide variety of intersections that we're analyzing as part of this development. Again, it's not focused just on the intersections directly in front of the site, but it was an overarching network that the city and the state felt should be analyzed as part of the development. And as you can see in the blue box in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, PennDOT and Streets, they allow you to, when you're comparing the pre and post development conditions, you're allowed to have a 10-second increase in average vehicle delay. So whenever we're comparing those analytical results from the post development condition to the pre-development condition, we're looking to see if those future levels of service fall within that allowable 10-second variance. If they don't fall within that allowable 10-second variance, then we're going and looking at what mitigation or intersection improvements would be required to get the operational conditions back within that allowable criteria. We look at things such as modifying the traffic signal timing to see that if the intersection could be timed in a more efficient manner, which would again improve the overall level of service. We also look at things like potentially adding turn lanes, left and right turn lanes at an intersection, or potentially lengthening those turn lanes, which may currently exist at the intersection. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the phase one of the industrial developments located along 26th Street, directly opposite its current intersection with Hartramp Street. On the left side of the page, you can see the 26th Street and Hartramp Street intersection in its current configuration. 26th Street, as it exists today, provides 2 lanes in the northbound and southbound direction, currently separated by a concrete median. As you go northbound towards Hartramp Street, there's a dedicated through lane, and then there's also a shared through right turn lane, which allows you to turn onto Hartramp. And then the westbound approach of Hartramp Street provides a dedicated right turn lane to execute a right turning movement onto northbound 26th Street. On the right side of the page, what you'll see is a graphical depiction of what the intersection would look like in the future conditions as a result of the development of phase one of the industrial development. The first thing that you notice is that we would be constructing a new signalized intersection at this location. This signalized intersection will provide the primary access to phase one of the industrial development. It'll also provide primary access to some of the future phases of the development. As you can see, there's also significant intersection improvements that are going to be undertaken as part of the installation of this signalized intersection. There's going to be road widening, which will occur on the HRP property. So 26th Street will actually widen in the westerly direction onto the HRP property to accommodate the additional lanes that you can see before you on that graphic. The biggest changes you can see are there'll still be 2 dedicated through lanes going in a northbound direction. You'll still have that dedicated through lane and that shared through right turn lane. But you're also going to have 2 dedicated northbound left turn lanes, which will provide dedicated left turn access into the industrial development. What that ensures is that anybody, whether it's a passenger car or a truck waiting to turn left into the facility, isn't going to impede anyone else that's looking to travel and continue northbound on 26th Street. On the southbound direction, we're actually adding an additional southbound through lane. So it'll go from 2 southbound through lanes in its current configuration to 3 dedicated southbound lanes in the proposed condition. There'll also be a proposed dedicated southbound right turn lane into Hartramp Street, which again will allow vehicles that are continuing in a southerly direction to not be impeded by any either passenger vehicles or trucks that are slowing down and turning right into the facility. We'll also be providing 2 dedicated right turn lanes exiting the facility in an easterly direction onto southbound 26th Street, and 2 dedicated left turn lanes that'll provide northbound access to 26th Street. Also important to note that the configuration of Hartramp Street will not be changing as part of the introduction of this traffic signal to this intersection. There will be no through movements from the industrial development across 26th Street onto Hartramp Street. That's going to be continue to be configured in a right in, right out configuration such that the through movements across 26th Street will not be permitted. You'll only be able to access the easterly side of Hartramp Street as you do today from northbound 26th Street. You'll also be able to continue to turn right out of Hartramp Street and continue northbound on 26th Street. Next slide, please. This provides a cross-sectional view again of what I just described from the aerial view. As you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, 26th Street in its current configuration, as I mentioned, 2 dedicated lanes going northbound, 2 dedicated lanes going southbound, separated by a raised concrete median. In the proposed condition, you can see the significant amount of additional widening which will occur, 3 complete new additional lanes, and again, all of that road widening will occur on the western side of 26th Street in the HRP property. And again, that will really allow the intersection to function in its most efficient manner that'll allow traffic to continue to travel both north and southbound along 26th Street and not be impeded by traffic executing turning movements into the industrial development. It's important to note too that while these intersection improvements are going to accommodate the first phase of the industrial development, we have looked at the potential overall traffic generation for the entire development and factor that into the design of these intersection improvements. So these intersection improvements would be constructed under phase 1. Well, they're only going to serve phase 1 at this time. They've been designed to accommodate the traffic that would be generated by the overall development. And that's really to ensure that, these intersection improvements don't need to be reconstructed when phases 2, 3, and the other industrial phases come online. We want this to continue to serve as the primary access point off of 26th Street. And once the improvements are put in place, they'll be able to continue to function while the remainder of the phases of the development come online. Next phase, please, or next slide, please, Brad. We also, as part of the improvements associated with phase one, looked at the intersection of 26th Street and Penrose Avenue. As you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, the overall intersection in its current configuration, South 26th Street intersects Penrose Avenue. It forms a four-leg signalized intersection. We really discussed the existing and proposed lane geometry at that intersection. As part of phase one of the overall development, we're not proposing to construct any physical improvements at this intersection. We are, however, as I mentioned earlier, looking at retiming the existing traffic signal to provide a more efficient operation of the intersection. What that's going to allow us to do is reassess where the green time is established between the Penrose Avenue and the South 26th Street phases, and come up with an intersection traffic signal timing, which will really allow the operation to function in a more efficient manner than it does today. What that allows us to do is, even with the additional traffic that would be generated under phase one of this development, it allows us to be in compliance with that allowable 10-second variant that PennDOT and the Streets Department has. And will, again, allow this intersection to really function more efficiently than it does today. As I mentioned, these intersections will continue to be evaluated through future phases of the development. So as phase two, phase three, phase four come online, this traffic impact study will be regenerated, and it'll be specifically addressed to account for any additional traffic that would be generated as a result of those additional phases of development. It'll also account for, any additional ongoing development in the area that may have come online since the preparation of that additional traffic study. So, it's going to continue to provide the most accurate assessment of the actual traffic impacts as this development is constructed over time. Next phase, please. Or next slide, sorry. I believe that goes back to you, Mia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Corey. So last but not least, wanted to provide a quick update on our community engagement efforts. Matt, next slide. So since our last meeting, we held our summer internship program. And through that program, we employed more than 30 students who either worked for us at the Bellwether District or with one of our vendors or partners over the summer for 6 weeks. For our Bellwether District team, each student had the opportunity to shadow a member of our team and learn all about the project and different careers in redevelopment. On the photo directly to the right of that, we hosted the MyWick program for the second year in a row. MyWick is a free construction-focused camp for young women, so aimed at getting young people, young women specifically, interested in careers in real estate and construction. And so this summer we sponsored the program again and hosted 30 students on site for a tour and discussion about the Bellwether District project. We were also out and about at community events this summer, including Resident Action Committee 2's job fair in Grace Ferry and Councilman Johnson's community appreciation event. Wanted to remind everyone of our remaining fall calendar. We're really excited about our upcoming community resource fair on Thursday, October 5th. During the event, which will take place at the Bellwether District, members of our team will be available to answer questions about the project. We will offer site tours, and we'll be joined by a number of community and workforce partners who will all provide resources. We're continuing to share information about that event on our social media accounts and via email, and you can RSVP through a member of our team or the QR code that you'll see on the following slide. And last, we'll round out the year with a virtual community meeting on Tuesday, November 14th. More details to follow on that. So again, here's the flyer for the community resource fair, and we'll be getting that information out tomorrow and throughout the next week. So we hope to see you there. Next slide. Wanted to provide a quick update on our community benefits agreement process. For those of you who are new to this conversation, a CBA is an agreement between a developer and community members that really kind of solidifies the way that we'll give back over the course of the project. We committed to a CBA in fall of 2022 and officially kicked off the process earlier this year. We're utilizing a group of over 20 community organizations, nonprofits, and other key stakeholders that represent South and Southwest Philly communities as part of this process. And our CBA group has met several times, both in person and virtually, and will meet monthly, close to monthly, over the next 6 months throughout the remainder of the process. As far as timing, we hope to have a CBA by early to mid 2024. And as promised, we'll continue to kind of report out on our progress towards the CBA at our public meetings throughout that process. So Matt, if you go, yep. So here's my contact information if needed. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. With that, we can take down the slide deck and start Q&A. Great. So first question, I think there's been, it's been interpreted that we're taking credit for the fire that led to the close of the refinery. So I want to provide some clarification around that. Melissa, do you mind taking that one for us?
Oh, sure, Mia, thanks. Yeah, I think that's important to address because we're certainly not taking credit for the fire that occurred under the prior ownership of the oil refinery. But I think it's important to understand that the fire led to the bankruptcy of Pesrum, not necessarily the closing of the facility. Another refinery provider could have, or operator rather, could have purchased the facility and continued operating it as such. We, HRP, obviously not a refinery operator, so we purchased the site and have invested to date over $250 million in the decommissioning of the refinery so that it can never be a refinery again. And that's what we're taking credit for. We're very proud of that fact.
Thanks, Melissa. Next question, I'm going to go to you, Corey. This is coming from Sarah Bond. Given the intended uses of the industrial phase, is it realistic to assume that in the TIS that traffic into and out of the site will conform to a typical Monday through Friday peak hour pattern? Is it more likely that traffic will operate in and out of the site on a more regular basis throughout the day? And if so, why are peak hour impacts being used as the primary impact?
Thanks, Mia. And Sarah, that's a great question. So yeah, so when we look at these, the pre and post development analysis for these developments, we do really focus on the peak hour traffic impacts, even for industrial type uses. You are correct that unlike an office development, which typically has its concentration really focused in and around the peak hours and very limited activity throughout the day, industrial type uses do have additional traffic generation throughout the course of the day. However, the roadway volumes are lower at that time. So when we're looking at these pre and post development analyses, we really want to focus on the worst case scenario. So that really occurs when the adjacent street volumes are at their highest and we have the supplemental traffic that would be generated on as a result of this development on top of that. If we look at other periods throughout the day, even though the site will continue to be generating traffic throughout the day, because the adjacent street volumes are actually lower, there's more capacity on that adjacent roadway network. So it can accommodate those additional traffic demands during that time. And that's really why we focus on the typical peak commuter hours for industrial development.
Great. Thank you, Corey. I'm going to take the next two questions. So the next question is coming from Roger Roberts. How could an internet or data provider get involved with a project and become a preferred vendor? And so the answer is, if you're interested in connecting on opportunities with our project, you can feel free to reach out to me and I'll connect with you directly and share more information. So Matt, if you don't mind just putting my contact information up so people have it and can get in touch. The next question is, Sarah Bond, is the list of community advisor members available to the public? Sarah, we did present that list of CAP members publicly in several of our fall public meetings. I have your email address, so I'll reach out to you and just send you a quick list so that you have it as a reference. Next one, the next few actually, Corey, are going back to you. So on traffic, what impacts are you looking at the site generating at peak hour?
Yeah, and I can really handle these next two in a collective response. So the site, we're assuming that the site will generate its peak volumes during the peak hours. So there, as I mentioned, there'll continue to be traffic generation throughout the day. But again, really, you're going to see, shifts that are going to be occurring, shift changes that are going to be occurring during the peak hours or in and around the peak hours that are really going to have the most significant traffic impact. And again, that's why, the state and the streets department require us to focus on those peak commuter hours as part of our traffic impact study, because if there is traffic generation occurring at other hours throughout the day, as I mentioned, the roadway volumes are significantly less, and the results of our existing traffic counts, when we go out and collect that traffic data to set that baseline condition on the adjacent roadway network, show that there is traffic fall off in those areas outside of the peak hours. So as I mentioned, when we're looking at those hours as the focus of our study, that's really when capacity is at a minimum. And that's why, again, both the state through PennDOT and the Philadelphia Street Departments require us to focus on those hours in our traffic study.
All right, thank you so much. Next question, an adjacent site was labeled PGW. I assume that this is a site owned by PGW, and does HRP anticipate purchasing this site? Kurt, can you take this one?
Hey, Mia, yes, I can. So on some of the slides that we had, there is a landmass that it kind of bifurcates both of our campuses. It's just north of Passyunk Avenue. It's south of our innovation campus and north of the industrial campus. That is owned by PGW. And right now there are no plans to purchase that site. PGW does have a few core operations that still go on in terms of how they transmit gas around the city. So it does not seem like there's going to be a sale of that site in the near future.
Great, thank you so much, Kurt. Okay, so next question, are there any plans in place for a net zero microgrid, community district energy, or other innovative configurations to ensure reliability and support energy modernization and decarbonization for this development? Can we go to Melissa on that?
Sure, Mia, I'm happy to address that. So we are looking at what kinds of renewable on-site energy could be generated. That is definitely something that we are studying. We think we have a very strong opportunity in solar, in other words, PV panels, especially on the industrial campus, where you will have, pretty large, flat roofs that would lend themselves readily to that kind of installation. So we are looking at that and how that source of energy could be used throughout the site. We don't think it will be enough necessarily, at least in the short term, to meet all of the power needs of the site, but it is something that we're studying and plan to continue looking at in more and more detail as we continue to work on the design.
Thanks, Melissa. Do we have additional questions? You're welcome, Wayne. Okay, we'll leave it open for a few minutes longer for additional questions. And while we're pausing for a few minutes, just a reminder, my contact information is up on the screen if you have questions after the meeting. So please feel free to reach out. My door is always open. We have a question about how many community members are in this meeting. David, we at its peak had about 50 people registered for the call. Tim is asking if we're able to do a site tour at any time. Just want to remind people that at our community meeting our community resource fair next week, we are offering site tours. So really excited about that, and we encourage people to register to attend. We'll be sending out some additional information over email and on our social channels this week. But yes, we are going to be offering site tours. Okay, so I'm going to kick it back to Kurt really quickly because I think someone missed your answer on the PGW site question. Would you mind just reiterating that, Kurt?
Yeah, not a problem. The landmass that is in between our two campuses is owned by PGW, and they have some core operations that go on that landmass. So we don't have any plans to purchase that, and they don't have any plans to sell that at the current time.
Thank you so much, Kurt.
Yep.
We're going to go to Wayne's question about STEM-related programs. Our STEM-related programs for students currently in place in this stage. I will share that as part of our internship program, students were matched with members of our team on our environmental team, for example, and so had exposure to employees of ours that work in STEM. But in terms of our overall workforce commitments, our current focus is on construction-focused jobs because the nearest term jobs added will be construction jobs. But as you heard Melissa mention, there's also going to be an estimated 19,000 jobs created by our future tenants, which will include STEM-related jobs. And so as the project progresses, our approach to workforce will progress, and we will absolutely be looking at offering young people STEM-related, and others and adults workforce training programs. So it's certainly in our plans. Going to Corey, would you discuss the TIS regarding 26 and Tashkent?
Yes, that intersection is included as part of the TIS.
Great. I assume the HRP sites are contiguous?
Hey, Mia, I think that may be another follow-up. So the PGW property does not go all the way to the river. So our site is contiguous, but it's only through a corridor that's on the west side of that PGW property.
Thank you for taking that one. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Okay, some good additional questions. We'll just wait another minute or two if we have additional questions. And again, just as a reminder, my contact information is on this slide. You can feel free to reach out to us after the meeting if anything comes up for you that wasn't answered this evening. Okay. With that, I just want to thank everyone who attended this evening, and we're excited to share updates in the future. Again, these meetings will be held quarterly. I encourage you to attend our community resource fair, which is upcoming on October 5th, and then our next virtual community meeting discussion will be held on November 14th. So we look forward to seeing you at both of those. Thank you so much and have a nice evening.